Some years are just dates on a calendar, but others, they're crucibles. In 1905 was a crucible. It was a moment when all these core conflicts of the modern world about the power of government, the responsibility of corporations, and America's place on the globe were all forged under some seriously intense pressure. So let's dive in and see how it all went down in one single pivotal year. The year really kicked off with this fundamental clash of ideas, happening right at the very top of American power. And this wasn't just some political disagreement, This was a fight for the very soul of the country. And here it is, right here, the central conflict of 1905 in a nutshell. On one side, you've got President Theodore Roosevelt. He's fresh off a huge election win, and he's arguing that the federal government absolutely has a duty to step in, to regulate these huge corporations and to protect everyday people. But on the other side, you've got the Supreme Court, and they are championing this idea of liberty of contract, which basically says the government has no business interfering in the deals made between bosses and their workers. So, how did this big ideological battle actually play out in the real world? Well, it ended up shaping the nation's laws, creating a legal landscape that was, to put it mildly, just deeply contradictory. The first big shot was fired on April 17th. The Supreme Court, in this now famous case called Lochner v. New York, completely struck down a state law that limited how many hours a baker could work in a week. The state said, hey, this is for their health and safety. The court said, nope. And the long-term impact of this one decision was just massive. It kicked off what historians now call the Lochner era. For the next 32 years, think about that, 3 decades, this ruling was basically used as a constitutional weapon by big business to shut down all sorts of progressive labor reforms. It was a giant roadblock for anyone trying to regulate wages or hours or just basic working conditions. But not everyone on the court was on board. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., in his legendary dissent, basically called out the majority. He said they were just writing their own personal economic theory, this idea of pure hands-off capitalism, into the Constitution. It was a really powerful critique, and one that would echo for decades to come. So you'd think, okay, the court is all about protecting individual economic freedom from the government, right? Well, it's not quite that simple. Because believe it or not, in that exact same year, the court made another huge ruling. In a case called Jacobson versus Massachusetts, it upheld the government's power to force people to get vaccinated for smallpox. So it confirmed this sweeping state power over individual bodies, all in the name of public health. This created a really stunning paradox. Let's break it down. In Lochner, the court says your freedom to sign a contract to work dangerously long hours is sacred. But in Jacobson, it says the state can force you to get a medical procedure. So your economic freedom was untouchable, but your actual bodily autonomy, well, that could take a backseat to the common good. Now, while all these judges were debating these abstract legal ideas, the real-world consequences of an unregulated economy were being written in blood. Just look at this number, 58. That's how many people died on March 20th when a boiler exploded at the Grover Shoe Factory. The whole building just collapsed and then caught fire. This horrible and totally preventable disaster became the perfect, tragic argument for why President Roosevelt was demanding mandatory factory inspections. Suddenly, this wasn't a theoretical debate anymore. And you know what? This internal conflict was pretty much mirrored on the world stage. At the very same time America was fighting with itself over what it was supposed to be at home, it was also projecting a new, and just as contradictory, identity out into the world. So in 1905, the United States was basically playing 2 completely different roles. On one hand, you have the noble global diplomat, a peacemaker between these major world powers, and on the other hand, you have the heavy-handed regional policeman telling its smaller neighbors exactly what to do. The peacemaker role was on full display when Roosevelt stepped in to end the brutal Russo-Japanese War. He brought both sides all the way to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and personally hammered out a peace treaty. It was a massive diplomatic win that really cemented America's status as a world power, and it even won Roosevelt the Nobel Peace Prize. But then at the same time, Roosevelt unveiled his corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Now, this was a radical new policy. He was basically claiming the U.S. had the right to act as an international police power anywhere in Latin America, and he didn't waste any time putting it to use. In 1905, without even asking Congress, he just took control of the Dominican Republic's entire financial system to make sure they paid their debts. So, peacemaker one day, policeman the next. But the big changes in 1905 weren't just happening in the White House or the Supreme Court. No, there were powerful new challenges to the old way of doing things, and they were rising up from the ground floor of American society. This was the era that really showed off the raw power of the press. That year, a socialist newspaper started publishing chapters of a new novel called The Jungle by a guy named Upton Sinclair. It exposed the absolutely disgusting, unsanitary conditions in Chicago's meatpacking plants. And the public was horrified, not so much by the terrible treatment of the workers, which is what Sinclair wanted to highlight, but by what was actually in their food. The public outcry was so huge, it forced Congress to pass landmarked food safety laws the very next year. At the same time, a completely different kind of challenge was brewing in the fight for civil rights. In 1905, a group of black activists, led by W.E.B. Du Bois, got together and issued this incredibly powerful declaration. It was an uncompromising demand for full equality right now. And what's so crucial to understand here is that the Niagara movement was a radical break from the past. It completely rejected the slow, go-along-to-get-along approach of other black leaders like Booker T. Washington. This new confrontational strategy of demanding rights, not just asking for them, set a whole new course for the civil rights struggle. It actually laid the direct groundwork for the founding of the NAACP. So you have all these battles in courtrooms, in factories, in foreign embassies, and they were all defining the rules for the industrial age. But in 1905, completely under the radar, a quiet revolution was happening that was about to change everything. The answer? A 26-year-old patent clerk working in Bern, Switzerland. His name was Albert Einstein. In what scientists now call his miracle year, Einstein published 4 papers that just completely turned physics on its head. One explained the nature of light, which laid the foundation for quantum mechanics. Another proved that atoms were real. A third introduced the theory of special relativity, forever changing how we understand space and time. And the 4th paper? Well, it contained an afterthought, almost a little side note to his theory of relativity. It was a simple little equation you've probably heard of, E equals mc squared. This was the idea that mass and energy are just 2 sides of the same coin, and it was the theoretical key that would eventually unlock the atomic age. So when you look back, were the struggles of 1905 ever really solved, or were they just defined? That year basically set the agenda for the entire 20th century, and the crazy thing is, the questions it raised are the very same ones we are still wrestling with today. How do we balance our individual freedoms with our collective safety? What is America's proper role in the world? And maybe the biggest question of all, how do we wisely manage the incredible and sometimes terrifying new powers that we create?